Gentlemen of the Confederated Congress, ladies, guests, citizens all, thank you for congregating this evening with me to hear that I am about to resign as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. We have met our objectives. We have prevailed over 8 years. We have sacrificed, given our lives, split families to come to this moment in which we have before us unequaled, unparalleled opportunities. I will soon retire to Mount Vernon to be with Mrs. Washington and seek to live the rest of my life in sweet repose and peace, nevermore to pick up a musket. But before I do that, I want to take this opportunity to share some thoughts that I have learned over the last 8 years as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, especially working with you, members of the Confederated Congress. There are some things that I think that we all could benefit from my perspective. I will not be part of the Confederated Congress. You will be. And in that, I want to just say we embarked on a very tenuous schedule here. There was no reason why we should have prevailed, but we did. And it was our, we had 150 years before the Declaration of Independence, we were colonials, we were provincials, we were loyal Englishmen in the 13 different colonies. And England allowed us to govern ourselves. We had our own legislature, we made our own decisions, we passed our own laws, we had our own militia, we minted our own currency. We did everything independently, and England allowed us to do that. And so we, over the time, learned to be very independent, but we were still loyal to the crown. Why? Because England had the most powerful army, the most powerful navy in the world, and the best government. We felt as loyal Englishmen that we had more rights and privileges than other countries of Europe, and we did. And so as we are colonists and we are in control of our own fate, that just developed more rights for us. And also, as loyal Englishmen, we were proud to serve alongside the British Army. In 1754, as you remember, the French in Canada were coming down the Allegheny and Ohio rivers and building a fort at the forks of the Monongahela and Allegheny as they were making their way to New Orleans. They, on the basis of Marquette's discoveries, claimed this vast area of the Ohio River. Well, Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia wanted to challenge them coming down the river. And so he sent an emissary to Captain LaGuardia and said, leave the Ohio Valley. So we, as loyal colonists, took the first step to say, go no farther. He sent a young Virginia major, very inexperienced, to challenge them. That was yours truly. That didn't work. Captain LaGuardia said, no, we are not going to. This is Louis's land. We won't. A year later, the King in Parliament sent General Braddock over with 1,500 troops, 90 officers, to go through the forest, cutting a 12-mile wide road through the forest over the Allegheny and down, to challenge the French there at Fort Duquesne, there at the forks of the two rivers. He seconded 700 provincials with him. I was one of the ones that participated in that. So we go through the wilderness, and when we're within 7 miles of Fort Duquesne, the French and Indians ambush us. We did not expect it. We were in a hollow, very disadvantageous place to be. And the English suffered their worst loss in their history there. And we retreated. 3 years later, England sent a second general, General Forbes, with a larger force and larger amount of provincials. Now, the provincials under Braddock were from Virginia, South Carolina, and Maryland, but the provincials for General Forbes was Pennsylvania and Virginia. We also went. As we're going, cutting our way through the forest again, and getting close, the French decide that the force is too big, they don't want to hold the fort, so they burn the fort. So we turned around, came back. 5 years later, in 1763, the British beat the French and their allies. They were not fighting just on this North American continent. They were in the South American continent. They were in the Caribbean. They were in Europe. They were in Africa. They were in India. There were many different fights going on. And the British beat the French and the Allies. And with that, the land of the Ohio Valley, the French ceded to the British Crown, as well as Canada. We, as faithful British colonists, felt as though as recompense for what we gave, we should be able to just move into the area in the Ohio Valley and claim those lands, and because we were growing. But the king said, no, proclamation of 1763, you can't go in there. We don't want you to go in there. We didn't understand why that was, but we just said, okay, we are loyal British subjects, and we will stay away. And we did. But that was a change in 1763, because although under our charters we had been self-sufficient and we were able to elect people to represent us and pass laws and all these other things, we were not used to a little bit more involvement from the king in our affairs. But we acquiesced. Also, when we were colonists, one of the things that we had to do, whatever resources that we developed as a colony, we had to send those resources to England to be refined and processed. We could not do it ourselves. And so whether it was timber or furs or fish or iron ore or tobacco or rice, wool, cotton, indigo, everything had to go to England to be refined, processed, turned into useful objects, and then sold back to us. And so we got furniture, we got cloth, we got metal instruments for farming or for kitchen use. So we had a good relationship, 1763. So we can't go in, and when they left and took the troops back to England, they left 8,000 troops here. And we asked them, well, why are you leaving 8,000 troops here? And they said, well, it's for your protection. And we say, the French are gone. We don't need 8,000 troops. Oh, yes, but the Indians are still there. Well, yes, but if you remember, we had militia and kept them in check for 130 years. So we don't really need this protection. And they say, and we say, anyway, the troops are in the big cities. They're in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. But they can be mobilized and moved to the front at any time. So we didn't understand, we didn't welcome the involvement, but we started to notice that very slowly different things were changing. Then 1764, Parliament passed an act called the Sugar Act. And we noticed that the cost of sugar had increased dramatically. And we were wondering why that is. And Sam Adams out of Boston looked into that, and he found out that it's not because sugar increased. It's that within the tariffs and the duties, there was a tax. And James Otis said, taxation without representation is tyranny. We picked that up. We were more interested in the legislative part. Again, we were able to pass laws. We were able to tax ourselves. Now all of a sudden, Parliament in London, 3,000 miles away, says, no, we are going to pass some laws that you must obey. And we say, well, we have no representation. We are English citizens, and nobody's there to represent us. They haven't even been here. And they say, oh, no, yes, we represent you. We've got your best interest in line. But you don't even know what our interests are. You don't live here. But they insisted anyway. But we began to petition, we began to assemble, and there were members of Parliament that agreed with us. And so within a short period of time, they overturned that tax. Not to be discouraged, the following year they passed another tax. I mean, the sugar tax, they didn't tell us the truth. They buried it. They tried to hoodwink us. Stamp Act, they said, we're taxing you. This is a tax. We're going to use it to pay the troops. We are going to help defray the cost of the war, the 7 years war that we fought on several nations. And we still said, but we have no representation. If we don't have representation, then we don't think that we should pay. And they said, no, you do have to pay. Parliament was still divided, and so they overturned that. The year later, they passed the Declaratory Act. They declared it didn't matter what we thought. It didn't matter if nobody from the colonies were in London. They get to do what they want to do. So you can see the escalation that we were seeing back then. And in order to help keep the peace, they sent more troops. And we were scratching our heads, well, peace against who? Of course, against us, to keep us in line, because we had a sneaking suspicion that it would get worse, and it did. Many of the troops were in Boston. Boston at that time was about 15,000 people, and they had several thousand British soldiers and officers there. And so with the local populace, there were difficulties. Young soldiers have a tendency to celebrate at pubs and what have you, along with the local population, and sometimes things get out of hand, which they did. It was not a happy situation. And then 1770, the Boston Massacre, and a mob formed, and a single British sentry was surrounded, and then soldiers came to his aid. Shots were fired. 5 provincials were killed. It caused a stir, a trial, minimum punishment against the regulars, because, quite frankly, the mob was out of hand. Justice was done, but you couldn't convince everybody that, especially not the Sons of Liberty. 1773, the Tea Act is passed, and it's an act that has tax within it. Once again, and we say, no, we've been there before. We didn't want to buy the tea. boycotts occurred. But for some, it wasn't enough. And so December 1773, a group of Mohican Indians, possibly provincials, dressed up as Mohicans because it would be a crime if they were, their names were known for what they did. They clambered aboard 3 different ships, took the casks of tea, split them open, dumped it into the harbor, Boston Harbor. The tea destruction. This angered England Parliament tremendously. Although previous to this, we had the support of some people in Parliament that vanished because this was private property. The British East India, they were the owners of the tea. And so for private citizens to go and destroy private property was more than many of those parliamentarians could take. And actually, Dr. Franklin also was against those efforts, and he spoke out against that, as well as I did. I did not support those. John Adams said it wasn't the right thing to do, but you know, other things are going on too, and this show of displeasure may be warranted. 74 occurs. The coercive acts. The coercive acts were 5 acts that were designed to punish Boston. It was not just that you will submit to all these acts, it was, we will crush you, Boston. The first act was the Port Act. It was an act that said no shipping can go out, no shipping can come in to the port of Boston. You are shut down. Well, that shut down the entire economy of Boston because it was dependent. New England was dependent. It was one of the largest ports in all the colonies. And the king in Boston, the king and Parliament says, you will submit, we will crush you. What they didn't realize is that the colonies were more united than they thought. And so the other colonies started sending provisions to Boston, food, other items that they'd need on a regular basis. And this, of course, angered Britain even more, seeing that there's more unity than they had anticipated. They thought it was strictly a Boston or New England issue. General Gage, trying to stave off any type of large-scale rebellion, sent 700 troops to Concord, Massachusetts. He had spies, and he had understood that in Concord there were muskets, there were musket balls, there were black powder, there's even artillery pieces there, stored in various homes, stored in various barns. And so he sent 700 British officer and men to Concord through Lexington. It took them 4 hours to get their force across Back Bay to be able to march up toward Lexington. By that time, everybody knew, all the militia knew that they're going somewhere. And so they were called out. And as they're marching toward Lexington, there are bonfires all along the way. Surprise, there was no surprise. They get to Lexington, and there's a group of 80, 90 provincials on the green at 3 o'clock in the morning. And Major Pitcairn wants to know why they're there. And so he's in the advance guard at 220 and sends a small detachment over to ask them, why are you here? And on their way over there, shot rings out. Everybody starts firing at each other. 8 provincials are killed. 1 British regular slightly wounded. Then when the main force catches up with them, the 700 of them proceed to Concord. Takes them 2 hours to get there. By that time, everybody knows exactly where they're going, and they know that provincial blood has been spilled. You're talking about a hornet's nest. By the time they get to Concord, there are 2,000-3,000 militia congregated there, and when they learn that the British are approaching, they go across the North Bridge, they go onto a side hill, and they wait. The British comes in, they realize that the militia is over there, they send a detachment to secure the bridge. For the next 3 hours, they're going through all the homes, all the barns, looking for these things that their spies said were there, but they weren't there. They weren't there because 3 days before, a young man by the name of Paul Revere had been through and warned them they were coming. Then he went 2 days before, warned them again, and that he had already been in Lexington before the British got there. So they were there, they didn't find anything. They did find some carriages for artillery where the cannon are placed on, and they burned the carriage. Those carriages, and they have an oil substance on them. And so this fire billows up, and the militia on the side hill sees this, observes this, and they say, oh no, they're burning Concord. Some say they're burning my house, because they're militia from Concord. They come down the hill. By this time, there are 4,000 to 5,000 of them. They come down to the hill, the detachment at the bridge, the British fire a volley, and then they take off. By that time, Colonel Smith, who was commanding the 700 British regulars, has been moving his troops back to Lexington and then Boston, which he continues in this direction. And of course, we all know what happened on the way back. Tremendous loss of life from the British as they made it back. Once they got back there, the militia followed them and then bottled them up. You know, it's just a small string of land over there to Boston, and Gage put a barricade over there. But now the militia, some 12,000 militia, was in Cambridge and Roxbury, and made sure that they wouldn't come out. 2 months later, General Ward allows Isaac Putnam to bring troops up to Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, which is just north of Boston, across the bay there. The British could not let that go unchecked. They sent a force over there, charged up Breed's Hill 3 times, tremendous loss of officers and men. The third time, when we ran out of black powder, they were able to prevail. The die was cast. There would be no turning back. Our future was sealed. We would have to fight. When this was occurring, the Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia. I was at the Continental Congress, and then we heard about the altercation, the battle at Bunker Hill. And we knew that we had to do something. Confederation Congress, they decided, Continental Congress, that we need more military resistance. We need a force, a Continental Army. So they appoint a young colonel from Virginia to head that effort, yours truly. I go up there, and I see by this time 15,000 New England militia there. They're disorderly, and I won't go into the details, but they're not sterling. I seek to organize them for an effective blockade to the British. Then in March of '76, the British evacuate. Gage and them, they go up to Canada, Halifax, they're on Nova Scotia. We hightailed it from Boston down to New York, Manhattan, because we knew that if they were to come back in force, that's where they would go. And so moved at this point 19,000 militia into Manhattan. We placed about 12,000 up on Brooklyn Heights there on Long Island, because we felt as though that would be the most advantageous place for us to defend, kind of like Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill. So we fortified that. In the weeks to come, Britain sent over 400 ships, boats, transports, with over 32,000 men aboard, landed them on Staten Island, disembarked, and they began to make plans to attack us at Brooklyn Heights. They said those in Manhattan, when they looked across the harbor, there were so many boats that the masts of the boats, it looked like a forest there. We were ill prepared to face the might of the British Empire. We're farmers, we're sailors, we're shopkeepers. We don't have the armament. Some only have pitchforks. The British, they have artillery. No European power was able to stop them. We had to. Not much favoring us, but we had other things going for us. We had suffered for years underneath the tyranny of the king and parliament. We had a cause that drove us forward, not just New England or the middle states or the southern colonies. We had a cause that we no longer wanted to live in a way with the king, where on the one hand he says we have rights, we have charters that can be taken away on a whim when we're not meeting expectations. We want our independence. We want our freedom, and we will do what we can to stand against England. And so that's what we did. And I am here before you, Congress, to congratulate you for your 8 years of efforts, the support of the military through those 8 years, even after Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, and then Brooklyn. And now we find that we're the lords and purveyors over a vast tract of land, from Canada south all the way down to Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Allegheny Mountains. We have full use of those lands, all the resources that we used to have to go through London and their factors and their businessmen and pay them fees and everything. We don't have to do that. It is ours. It is bountiful. And all we have to do is seize it. And that land area is twice the size of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. It's 1/3 the population, 30%. So we have an opportunity that I don't know if any other nation in the history of mankind that has ever been there, but we do. Absolute freedom and independence. Under the Articles of Confederation. We formed the Articles of Confederation in '76 as part of our Declaration of Independence. And when we formed them, we took a look at the other countries of the world, and we saw that probably the Republic would suit us best. Why? Because it is of we the people. And so we formed the Confederated Congress and the Articles of Confederation with that in mind. So a republic is born, our republic, when the rights of man was better understood than any other previous time in history, when the wisdom of the ages, the access to it, was more available to us than ever before. And so when we got together and we looked for all the advantages that we have, and we're completely free, we felt as though we could move forward with more energy than other nations if we seized it. The enemy is gone. It is ours. We had been 13 states. We had come together as a Confederated Congress in order to move forward against the enemy. The enemy is gone. Now what are we going to do? Are we going to dissolve the Confederated Congress and then go to 13 states and start to squabble again like the 13 colonies? Or are we going to be united and move forward? The choice is ours. Would we go forward or not? The eyes of the world were on us. They watched this, and they were wondering the same thing. Can we stay as a nation, or will we fragment and split? If we stay as a nation and we want equal footing with all the nations of Europe, we have to prove ourselves. We have to stay united. We have to work with each other. We have to prove that the only reason why we came together not was just to fight the enemy, but when we formed a republic, that we actually believed in Republican values, and Republican values valued virtue. And what is virtue? We define virtue is when a person didn't always think about themselves and always look to self-interest, but that they would look to the interest of others, other family members, other neighbors, other people within the town or the borough, other states. Yes, in the Confederated Congress that was there, yes, Connecticut's going to get more benefits in this decision, but you know, we get our own, so we're going to support the Connecticut's. If you do that, that's virtue, because you're saying the whole is worth more than just the individual parts. And together, we can do what we can't on our own. Europe also knew that not only were we separate 13 states, but we argued all the time. We looked for favors and advantages from the king for 130 years. Yes, we were independent, so all of us had different legislatures. And yes, we could pass our own laws, and we did. And when our laws disagreed with a neighboring law, we went with our law. Our neighbor colony said, no, our law applies. We said, well, no, we couldn't agree on the laws. Boundaries. In some cases, one colony said, no, our boundary is 5 miles into the area that you were claiming. You need to leave that. The other colony says, no way, that's our property. People in the middle didn't know what to do. What laws are they under? We were able to tax ourselves as well and mint our own currencies. Well then, so you have Pennsylvania that wants to sell $100 of produce to New York. And New York says, okay, here's 100 New York dollars. And Pennsylvania says, well, that's really worth $50 Pennsylvanian. Your 100 New York is 50, so you're going to have to give us 200 New York dollars. They were outraged. What? It's worth more than that, dollar for dollar. So you see, the Europeans were correct that we couldn't get with each other. Now that the enemy has been vanquished and is gone, will we revert back to the previous immaturity that we showed as neighbors? And that is the question. So under my own personal feeling at that time is this revolution could either be a blessing or a curse. Blessing or curse. If we stayed united under the Articles of Confederation and we continued to move forward as a nation and bless each other, then that's a blessing. But if we broke down and began to squabble, it would be a curse. Not only to us, not only to our families, but to our children and our grandchildren. So the decision that we would make at this particular time, do we stay united or do we splinter, is extremely important. So the states would have to make the decision, who would they serve? Would they just serve their own private interests, or would they serve the whole Confederation? They had to do the dollars and cents of it, but quite frankly, the spirit of unity is the cause that we started out with. We no longer wanted to be under a tyrant. We wanted our independence, our freedoms, and so that was what drove us forward. What should drive us forward again is the cause of the entire nation, the unity of that cause. I said this in one of my addresses: the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered deeply, perhaps as finally staked on the experiment trusted to the hands of the American people. Yes, we're talking states, but ultimately it is the people. If the people don't step up and they say, we want to be united and move forward, then we fail. We fought 8 years, and we break down into component parts, and then anarchy starts. We must stay united. Moving forward, there are 4 essentials that I think are important for us to do before we move forward. Yes, we've vanquished the foe, but if we were going to stay united, there are some things that we need to be doing to keep united. 4 essentials that I have seen after working with you, the Confederated Congress, and seeing the difficulties that you are under, and also observing the results of some inaction on your part. I have some essentials that I'd like to share with you. I am going to be direct. As a Virginia gentleman, normally I'm not this direct, but this is the last time I'm going to address you, and I want you to hear straight from what I think is important for you to hear. So please do not be offended. Realize that we are at a crisis point. We must choose what direction we go. First of all, the states must wholly commit themselves to the Confederated Congress, to this body. They must wholly say that we are going to do what this body says. So they fully submit them to this Confederated Congress, but also within the Confederated Congress, gentlemen, you need to come up with a supreme authority, a supreme head, that when you in Congress make a decision, that this supreme authority would take that decision and go to the different states and say, this is exactly what is expected of you. This many soldiers, this many muskets, this many tents, this many blankets, this many medical personnel. Previous to that time, it wasn't like that. The third thing, the states must fully comply with the Confederated Congress says, what the Supreme Authority says they must do. The states must fully comply. The fourth thing, any efforts to dissolve this Confederated Congress, to weaken the powers of this Confederated Congress, must be challenged. It is insidious. It is a cancer. If it is allowed to stay within this body and grow, we must root it out. The unity is so important as we move forward, not only for us internally, but if we want to be equal to the powers of Europe. We need to realize also that the Articles of Confederation are without corruption. They are so easy. They are doesn't require a lot of the states, but what it does require the states we need to seek for compliance there. Also, let me implore you that the soldiers, non-commissioned officers, officers of the Continental Army have given of their lives for 8 years. If you do not unite, if you do not move forward, many of them will feel you have wasted their lives and the lives of their comrades. So I implore you, this is an opportunity for you to step up and indicate that you will support them in what they gave. Another danger against where we're at is the spirit of union. We need to commit not just to the letter of the union. We need to look at those times when we were in the middle of the rebellion and we felt personally connected to people in other parts of, in other states, other colonies. And it's that fraternal feeling of unity. We need to make sure we reignite that in our hearts, because that is the cause that will propel us forward. It's not going to get easier. It will just get worse, quite frankly. If we do not unite, history shows us that our squabbles will turn to fighting each other, one colony against another, and then 2 colonies against 1, and 3 and 4, until it's total anarchy. And then when the citizens get to the point where it's so insecure, they don't want any more of this, they will look for a strong man to bind everybody together. And when a strong man appears, they follow the strong man, because they don't want conflict, they don't want division, they don't want bad feelings. They just want things to get back the way it is, or was at one point. Then that benevolent, strong man decides that what he has, the power, the greed, the corruption, isn't enough, and he wants more. And where does he take it from? Those that he freed, until he becomes a tyrant. That which we just fought to release ourselves from. If we allow ourselves to devolve, we will be right back where we started from. Let us not do that. Let us fight against that. That's the first essential that I would bring to your concern. A second essential, public justice. Let's be a nation that is known the world over for our justice. Justice, yes, our evenness, our fairness, the equality that we give to all of our citizens, that we make sure that we do not favor one part of our citizenry against another. Justice, that we're known for that, part of our national character. So we're fair and even. Also, part of that is fulfilling our obligations. The war is costly. We owe $20 million to various nations of Europe, to various individuals and groups within the colonies. We owe them $20 million. War is expensive. I understand that when I was up in Boston, and you all declared independence, that many of you stood and said, I'm willing to pledge half of my fortune, half of my wealth in support of this revolution. I'm not going to mention names, but this body, this Confederated Congress said, many of you, they would go that far. Well, what do we mean by wealth and property? We're talking about houses, homes, farms, barns. We're talking about ships. We're talking about wagons, instruments. We're talking about cash in the bank. If back then, at the commencement of the war, we said, yes, we will pay half of the revolution, the war is over. We're freed from additional costs. Could I encourage you in fraternal love for each other, that when you, as the Confederated Congress, go to the states and say that state, your portion of this debt is this much, but that we are willing to contribute in the short term just enough for the interest? Would you be willing to do that? That would show the creditors in Europe as well as domestically that we are willing to make some amount of payments just on the interest. You don't have to commit half of your wealth to that, just an increment of what you have now. Things are getting better. So public justice. But here's another debt. The debt we owe to the soldiers that spent the 8 years in the field. They're the ones that fought and died for the freedoms we have this evening, the independence that we have. They're the ones that drove the British out. Our debt of honor to them is to pay them their back fees, their back salaries that we promise them. Cannot we also do that in brotherly love and affection and appreciation for what they gave over the last 8 years? Short time ago, I dismissed the Continental Army. And I assured them that this body would honor those debts. I assured them that this body would not be so unthankful that they would not pay what they owe. And that I would also declare that to you tonight, which I have fulfilled my promise. The rest is up to you. There is a third essential that I want to bring to your attention too. That is the maintenance of a union militia. We need militia not only that are committed to each one of the states, but also a militia that can come together at any one time and form an army. And so we need a militia that are trained alike in every aspect of warfare. We benefit that we've just fought the British. We know what warfare is like. We've been trained by fighting them. And so the soldiers must be trained, but then they must have a trained cadre. Officers that became officers not just because they'd been in the village for so long and everybody liked them, or not because of the heredity of their of their life, but on merit. The soldiers have seen those officers that really knew what they were doing, that understood warfare, that understood the value of their troops and would not needlessly commit them to areas that they shouldn't. So we need to train officer corps, train militia, but of course, I just dismissed the Army. They're already out there. We just the states need to realize that they need to incorporate them into their state militias, and then they can train those that didn't participate in the revolution, maybe were too young to do that. And so we're already there. We need to pursue that because they will be the first line of defense if there's any foreign aggression. They will be the ones to stand and they will be trained. The fourth essential to survive a national unity, let us put beside us those colonial prejudices that we had. Let's ignore them, let's move forward. And they're here, their history, they keep us back. But if we're progressing and walking away to unity and our future, those things, they'll go aside. So let us not drag them along with us, and we will forget those. We'll have those peaceful and friendly dispositions that should characterize us as a people. Republican virtue? Yes, Republican virtue. Just from obedience or from fraternal communication and binding? From fraternal. So these are the four essentials that I feel as though we need to do as a country as we move forward. Again, I apologize for being so direct to you, and yet I implore your forbearance, your patience a little bit longer. I'm even going to be more direct. Forgive me. This war could have been won sooner with a less loss of life and possessions and money. We could have done this quicker. The dislocations to people, to families, to towns, to states could have been averted more significantly, not only because the war was shorter, but because there was indecisiveness, there was lack of forcefulness. Where? In this body. This confederated Congress dithered. The war lasted longer. More people died. Loss of property, dislocation of families, because we dithered. Now, before you get too offended, it wasn't your fault. The Articles of Confederation that were formed, remember, was 76. We were so afraid of a strong government, a king or a czar or an emperor, that we made sure that not only could we come together as a body, but that there wouldn't be a strength amongst us that would abuse us, that would do to us what we had been subjected to. And so under the Articles of Confederation, we made it weak. It was planned, but it was ineffective. I know. Because I had to be with those troops those 8 years, and I saw what the weakness of this group did. Now, you know that for anything to be passed, any agreement to be made, there had to be 100% agreement, which means very little got passed. And what did get passed, it was up to you to go to your states and convince the states that they ought to do these things. Some states said, yes, we'll do them. Some said, well, we'll do half. Some said, no, we're not going to do anything. The states that said, yes, we would do them, as additional requisitions came out, they were less apt to do that. Because what about those states that are doing absolutely nothing? We don't want to do this. The war is expensive. There was a lack of authority. Without sufficient authority, we could not enact the war as quickly as we thought. So, you were not to blame. But I wanted you to know what the impacts of this body with the weaknesses here and what occurred during the course of the war. We go back to my earlier recommendations. States must give themselves completely to this confederated army. There must be a supreme authority. When the supreme authority goes to your states and says, you must do this, the states must comply. All those things must comply. There will be no inefficiency there. Again, I apologize for my direction, that I was maybe offended some of you. At this point, it's time for me to bid you adieu. And let me say this. I bid adieu to you, the Congress, and I will implore the divine benediction on you, that God would have you and the state that you represent in his holy protection, and that he would incline the hearts of the citizens to cultivate a spirit of subordination and obedience to government, the governments that you represent, to entertain brotherly affection and love for one another, for their fellow citizens of the United States at large, and particularly for their brethren that served in the field. And finally, that he would most graciously be pleased to dispose us all to do justice, to love mercy, to demean ourselves with charity, humility, pacific temper of mind, which were the characteristics of the divine author of our blessed religion, and without an humble imitation of whose example in these things we can never hope to be a happy nation. My formal resignation. The establishment of civil and religious liberty was the motive which induced me to the field. The object is now attained, and it now remains to be my earnest and wishful prayer that the citizens of the United States would make a wise and virtuous use of the blessings that have been placed before them. I now retire from the great theater of action, and bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body, under whose orders I have so long acted, I here offer my commission and take my leave of all the employments of public life. Your most humble and obedient servant, George Washington.